The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining colony of Kepler 442b as Taemin wiped sweat from his forehead. He had been digging in the same spot for 3 days now, searching for mineral deposits that might make this barren world profitable. The red dust clung to everything, making his simple excavation tools feel heavier with each passing hour. Taemin was 26 years old and had spent most of his adult life on forgotten worlds like this one. As a human archaeologist, he was considered useful only for the dangerous work that more advanced species would not do. The Celestials, who ruled the galaxy with their superior technology and psychic powers, saw humans as little more than clever animals. They were strong enough to work in hazardous conditions and smart enough to follow basic instructions, but nothing more. The young man paused in his digging when his shovel struck something hard. Most of the time, it was just another rock or piece of old machinery left behind by previous mining operations. But this felt different. The metal rang with a clear, pure sound when he tapped it with his tool. Taemin carefully brushed away the red dirt. What he found made him step back in surprise. Smooth black stone formed perfect geometric patterns unlike anything he had seen before. The surface was covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when he looked at them directly. This was not human technology, nor did it match any celestial designs he knew. As he reached out to touch the strange surface, the symbols began to glow with a soft blue light. Taemin jerked his hand back, but the glow continued to grow brighter. The patterns seemed to respond to his presence, pulsing with an ancient rhythm that made his heart beat faster. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, something extraordinary was happening in the grand chamber of the Celestial Council. The most powerful beings in the galaxy had gathered for their monthly meeting, discussing trade routes and planetary conquests with the casual indifference of gods managing their domain. High Arbiter Velthos sat on his crystalline throne, his tall pale form radiating the confidence of absolute power. His species had evolved beyond the need for physical strength, relying instead on advanced technology and mental abilities that could reshape reality itself. Around him, representatives of a dozen other advanced species nodded in agreement as he spoke about expanding their territory into human space. The primitive worlds show promise for resource extraction, Velthos said, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. The humans are adequate workers and their simple needs make them easy to manage. We shall establish 3 new mining operations in their outer territories. Council member Jiho, whose people had joined the Celestial Empire only 2 centuries ago, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Unlike the others, he had actually visited human worlds and found their inhabitants more complex than the official reports suggested. But he knew better than to voice such thoughts in this assembly. The discussion was interrupted when the air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer. A cold wind that seemed to come from nowhere stirred the robes of the assembled council members. The temperature dropped so quickly that frost began to form on the polished floor. The shimmer intensified, and then they appeared. The elders had no physical form as other species understood it. They were patterns of light and energy, consciousness given shape through will alone. Their presence filled the chamber with a sense of age so vast that even the ancient Celestials felt young in comparison. These beings had walked among the stars when the galaxy was young, had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. "We bring warning," the elders spoke, their voice echoing not through sound but directly into the minds of all present. "The darkness stirs in the void between worlds. What was banished shall return. What was contained grows hungry." High Arbiter Velthos rose from his throne, his composure cracking slightly at this unexpected intrusion. "Elders," he said, forcing respect into his voice while his eyes showed irritation. "Your wisdom is always welcome, but surely your concerns are premature. Our technology has advanced far beyond what existed in your time. No force in the universe can threaten the Celestial Empire." The elders' forms pulsed with what might have been amusement or sadness. "Pride," they said. "Always pride. You measure strength by the power to destroy, wisdom by the complexity of your machines. But when the hour grows darkest, when your greatest weapons fail and your mightiest warriors fall, salvation shall come from the youngest children of the void." "Youngest children?" Velthos scoffed. "You speak in riddles. Those you consider least shall prove greatest. Those you dismiss as primitive shall stand where titans have fallen. The sleepers shall wake, and in their awakening, Find the key to victory. Council member Ji-ho leaned forward, his curiosity overcoming protocol. Which species do you mean? The humans? A wave of laughter rippled through the chamber. The idea that humans, with their crude technology and simple minds, could pose any threat to galactic powers was absurd. They could barely manage interstellar flight, still use chemical rockets for some of their vessels, and had never developed psychic abilities or energy manipulation. Humans? Velthos said, his voice dripping with contempt. They are useful for manual labor, nothing more. Their greatest achievement is learning to operate our discarded mining equipment. The idea that they could stand against any serious threat is laughable. The elders' forms began to fade, their energy signature growing weaker. Laugh while you may, they said. Remember our words when darkness comes hunting. Prepare the young ones, for they shall inherit what you cannot hold. And then they were gone, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the memory of their impossible presence. The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Prophecies and warnings were one thing, but this had felt different. The elders rarely appeared to anyone anymore, preferring their mysterious isolation in whatever realm they now inhabited. Nonsense, Velthos declared, settling back onto his throne. The elders have been absent from galactic affairs for millennia. They no longer understand the realities of modern civilization. Our power is absolute, but what if they are right? Ji-ho asked quietly. Right about what? That humans who cannot even master basic energy manipulation will somehow save the galaxy? The species that still uses metal tools and combustion engines? The ones who require environmental suits to survive on most worlds? Velthos shook his head. The elders have grown senile in their isolation. Back on Kepler 442b, Taemin stood before the glowing ruins, completely unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding in the halls of power. The symbols pulsed faster now, creating patterns that seemed almost like a language. He pulled out his simple recording device, a basic human machine that used magnetic tape instead of quantum storage, and began documenting what he saw. The glow spread outward from where he stood, revealing more of the ancient structure. What he had thought was a small artifact turned out to be the tip of something enormous. The entire hillside was covered with similar patterns, all now awakening after eons of sleep. Taemin did not understand what he was seeing, but he felt a deep certainty that this discovery would change everything. The symbols seemed to sing to him, filling his mind with images of distant stars and ancient battles, of darkness spreading across the void and light rising to meet it. He was just a human archaeologist on a forgotten mining world, armed with simple tools and basic knowledge. He had no psychic powers, no advanced technology, no special abilities that would mark him as important. But the ancient ruins knew better. They had been waiting for him, waiting for his species, waiting for the moment when the youngest children of the void would finally be ready to claim their destiny. The warning had been given. The awakening had begun, and in the darkness between galaxies, something stirred in response. Mi-young was piloting her cargo transport through the outer rim when every communication channel went dead at once. She had been carrying supplies to the mining station at Vega 7, a routine run that she had made dozens of times before. The young human pilot checked her equipment twice, thinking her simple radio system had finally broken down. But when she looked up from her instrument panel, she saw something that made her blood freeze. The distant star that should have been Vega 7 was gone. Not dimmed, not hidden behind a cloud of debris, simply gone, as if someone had reached out and erased it from existence. Where a bright blue sun had burned for millions of years, there was now only empty blackness that seemed to swallow the light from nearby stars. Mi-young's hands shook as she changed course, pushing her old fusion engines to their maximum output. Her ship was nothing compared to the sleek celestial vessels with their quantum drives and energy shields. But right now she was grateful for its simple, reliable systems. Something told her that complicated technology might not be safe anymore. 3 sectors away, Dongwu was dealing with his own crisis. As the colony administrator for New Seoul Station, he was responsible for the safety of 12,000 human settlers. The emergency alerts had been coming in all morning, each one more frightening than the last. Celestial patrol ships were disappearing. Entire fleets were going silent with no distress calls, no wreckage, no trace that they had ever existed. The most advanced military forces in the galaxy were vanishing like smoke in the wind. "Sir," his communications officer called out, her voice tight with fear. We just lost contact with the Celestial Command Base at Rigel. That was their most heavily defended system. Dongwu stared at the tactical display. Red marks showed the locations where contact had been lost. The pattern was expanding outward from the galactic rim, moving toward the core worlds with steady, unstoppable purpose. Each red mark represented millions of lives, entire civilizations that had been consumed by whatever was moving through space. "Start the evacuation procedures," he said quietly. "All non-essential personnel to the emergency shelters. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we might need to abandon the outer colonies." His assistant, a young woman named He-Jin, looked up from her console. "Where would we evacuate to? If the Celestials can't stop this thing, what chance do we have?" Dongwu had no answer for that. Humans were the lowest members of galactic society. Their weapons were primitive, their ships were slow, and their technology was considered barely functional by celestial standards. If beings who could move planets and reshape matter with their minds were being defeated, what could humans possibly do? But deep in his heart, he remembered old stories his grandmother used to tell. Stories about humans who faced impossible odds and found ways to survive. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when everything seemed lost. The thing that the elders had called IT was older than most stars. It had been born in the dark spaces between galaxies, feeding on the life force of entire worlds before the first civilizations had learned to make fire. IT was not a creature in any sense that living beings could understand. It was hunger given form, darkness made conscious, entropy shaped by malevolent will. For eons, IT had slept in the void, banished there by powers that no longer existed. But the vibrations of advanced technology had awakened it. The psychic emanations of the Celestial Empire had called to it like a beacon in the darkness. And now it was coming home to feast. The first Celestial fleet to encounter IT numbered over 300 ships. Each vessel was a masterpiece of technology, protected by shields that could stop supernova explosions and armed with weapons that could crack continents. The fleet commander, Admiral Zexthal, had fought in a dozen wars and never known defeat. He destroyed them all in less than an hour. The celestial ship's own advanced systems turned against them. Their quantum computers became extensions of IT's alien intelligence. Their energy shields became feeding tubes, channeling power directly into the creature's endless hunger. Their psychic crew members screamed as their minds were absorbed. "Into IT's collective consciousness, Admiral." Zexthal's final transmission was a warning that reached Celestial Command just as his flagship disappeared into the growing darkness. "It learns," he said, his voice distorted by terror and awe. "Every ship it takes makes it stronger. Every mind it consumes adds to its knowledge. Our technology feeds it. Our power makes it grow." The message cut off, leaving only the sound of static and the growing certainty that the galaxy faced something beyond their understanding. Byung-ho was a mining foreman on the asteroid belt colony of Ceres Station. He was a tough, practical man who had spent his life working with simple tools and basic machinery. When the emergency broadcasts started coming in, his first instinct was to check the station's defenses. What he found was laughable by celestial standards. A few old projectile weapons, some chemical explosive mines, and communication equipment that used radio waves instead of quantum entanglement. The kind of primitive setup that advanced species mocked as barely functional. But as Byung-ho studied the reports of IT's attacks, something began to make sense. Every ship that had been destroyed was highly advanced. Every system that had fallen relied on sophisticated technology and complex psychic networks. The more powerful a civilization was, the faster it seemed to fall. "Maybe being primitive isn't such a bad thing," he muttered, looking at his simple control panels and mechanical switches. Hard to corrupt what's not connected to anything. He began pulling crews back from the automated mining platforms, switching to manual operation wherever possible. Other humans thought he had gone crazy, but Byung-ho had a feeling that old-fashioned human stubbornness might be exactly what they needed. On Earth, the news was spreading through the human colonies with the speed of desperate hope and growing fear. The mighty Celestial Empire, which had seemed invincible for thousands of years, was crumbling. World after world was going dark. The greatest fleets in galactic history were being consumed like insects in a flame. Sora was working in the engine room of the cargo ship New Horizon when the captain called for an emergency meeting. She had been a starship engineer for 8 years, maintaining the simple fusion drives and mechanical systems that kept human vessels running. Her work was considered crude by galactic standards, but it was reliable and efficient. "They want us to help with evacuations," Captain Lee announced to his crew. "Celestial refugees are fleeing to human space. Apparently our worlds are too primitive to interest this thing." Sora felt a strange mixture of pride and fear at those words. For the first time in galactic history, being primitive was an advantage. The simple human colonies, with their basic technology and straightforward approach to problems, were becoming safe havens for beings who had once considered themselves gods. But she also knew that IT would not ignore them forever. Eventually, the darkness would come for humanity too. And when it did, they would need to be ready. As she returned to her work, Sora found herself looking at her tools with new eyes. The mechanical wrenches, the chemical welding equipment, the simple electrical systems that required no computer guidance. Perhaps there was strength in simplicity that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Across human space, similar realizations were beginning to dawn. The species that everyone had dismissed as barely intelligent might be the only one capable of surviving what was coming. Their primitive technology, their stubborn independence, their refusal to rely on advanced systems might be exactly the qualities needed to face a threat that fed on sophistication and complexity. The Elder's warning was beginning to make sense. The youngest children of the Void were waking up to their destiny, even as the galaxy burned around them. AT continued its relentless advance, consuming everything in its path. But in the simple human colonies, among people armed with nothing more than determination and basic tools, something was stirring. Something that had never existed before in galactic history: hope. The fall of Zephyria Prime was something no one thought possible. For 10,000 years, the capital world of the Celestial Empire had stood as the ultimate symbol of power and technology. Its cities floated in the sky, held aloft by gravity manipulation technology that could move entire moons. Its orbital defenses included weapons that could destroy approaching fleets before they even entered the star system. The planet itself was protected by energy barriers that had never been breached in recorded history. High Arbiter Velthos stood in his command center, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. 300,000 warships surrounded his homeworld, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Every vessel was a masterpiece of celestial engineering, crewed by the most powerful psychic minds in the known universe. IT consumed them all in 6 hours. Young-Su was hiding in a maintenance shaft aboard the refugee transport, ship Golden Hope, when the final battle began. As a human mechanic, he had been working on the ship's simple life support systems when the Celestial Evacuation Fleet arrived at Zephyria Prime. Now he watched through a small viewport as the greatest military force in the galaxy was torn apart like paper in a hurricane. The celestial ships fired their quantum disruption weapons, beams of energy that could unmake matter at the atomic level. The weapons struck its approaching darkness and simply disappeared, as if they had never existed. The creature absorbed every attack, growing larger and more powerful with each passing moment. "It's feeding on them," Young-Su whispered to himself, watching in fascination and terror. "Every weapon they use just makes it stronger." He thought about his own simple tools, the basic mechanical devices he used to repair the ship's systems. Nothing electronic, nothing connected to quantum computers or psychic networks, just metal and gears and chemical reactions. For the first time in his life, he felt proud of working with such primitive equipment. The evacuation ships tried to flee, but IT's influence spread faster than their fastest drives could carry them. One by one, the advanced celestial vessels began to malfunction. Their navigation computers turned against them. Their engines shut down. Their life support systems failed in ways that should have been impossible. But the Golden Hope kept flying. The ship was an old human cargo hauler that had been pressed into service to carry refugees. Its systems were so simple that there was nothing for IT to corrupt. Chemical rockets pushed it through space, mechanical controls responded to physical switches, and the crew navigated by looking at star charts printed on actual paper. "Why are we still moving?" asked one of the celestial passengers, a tall being with silver skin and 6 arms who had once commanded entire star systems. "All the other ships have stopped." Young-Su climbed out of the maintenance shaft, wiping grease from his hands with a dirty rag. Because we're too stupid to be corrupted, he said with a grim smile. Our technology is so basic that Thing can't figure out how to control it. As they watched, the last of the great celestial battleships vanished into the expanding darkness around Zephyria Prime. The capital world itself began to dim as IT's shadow fell across it. The floating cities crashed to the ground as their gravity systems failed. The orbital weapons platforms went silent. The energy barriers that had protected the planet for millennia flickered and died. High Arbiter Velthos felt its presence entering his mind like ice water in his veins. The creature's consciousness was vast and alien, older than civilizations and hungrier than black holes. It showed him visions of the galaxy's future, worlds stripped of all life and energy, stars going dark one by one until only emptiness remained. You cannot resist, it spoke directly into his thoughts. Your power calls to me. Your technology feeds me. Your psychic abilities make you part of me. Velthos tried to fight back, channeling all his mental strength against the invading presence. He had spent centuries developing his psychic powers, learning to reshape reality with the force of his will alone. But every attack he made was absorbed and turned back against him. His own abilities became weapons in IT's hands. In his final moments before his consciousness was consumed, Velthos remembered the elder warning. The youngest children of the void, those they considered least shall prove greatest. At the time it had seemed like meaningless prophecy. Now as his mind was devoured by cosmic hunger, he understood with horrible clarity. The humans. It could not easily consume the humans. Across the galaxy, the news of Zephyria Prime's fall spread like wildfire. If the capital world could be destroyed, if the High Arbiter himself could be consumed, then nowhere was safe. Panic gripped every advanced civilization as they realized that their technology, their psychic powers, and their sophisticated weapons were not protection against this threat. They were vulnerabilities. The Great Exodus began. Millions of ships fled from the core worlds toward the outer rim, carrying refugees from a dozen species. But there was only one place they could go, one region of space where IT seemed less interested in hunting. The crude, primitive human colonies that had always been considered the backwater of galactic civilization. Seok Jin had been a soldier once, fighting in the border wars between human settlements and alien raiders. Now he found himself in charge of security for New Angeles Station, trying to manage the flood of refugees streaming into human space. The station had been designed to house 50,000 humans. Now it held 3 times that number, with beings from across the galaxy sleeping in corridors and storage bays. They keep asking why we can't give them access to our computer networks, Hee-Jin reported to him during their daily briefing. She had been promoted from communications officer to refugee coordinator, a job that seemed to grow more impossible every day. They don't understand that we barely have computer networks. Seok-Jin nodded grimly. The aliens were used to living in environments where every device was connected to vast information systems, where artificial intelligence managed every aspect of daily life. Human colonies still used individual computers for specific tasks, printed documents for important information, and human operators for critical systems. Maybe that's why we're still alive, he said. Hard to hack what's not networked together. The refugees brought stories of worlds consumed overnight, of fleets destroyed in minutes, of entire species absorbed into IT's growing consciousness. But they also brought something else, confirmation that humanity was different. IT's attacks on human colonies were less successful, less complete. Human ships could still function in areas where advanced vessels failed. Human colonies could maintain communications when celestial systems went silent. Taemin was still on Kepler 442b, studying the elder ruins that continued to glow brighter each day. The symbols had begun forming new patterns, creating what looked like star maps and technical diagrams. He could not read the alien writing, but the images were clear enough. Locations throughout human space marked with symbols that pulsed with urgent energy. It's like they're trying to tell me something, he reported to Dongwu during their weekly communication check. The ruins are activating all over the colony. Some kind of network is coming online. Dongwu had his own problems to deal with. New Seoul Station was now the temporary capital of human space, coordinating refugee efforts across dozens of worlds. But he made time to listen to Taemin's reports, sensing that the ancient ruins might hold the key to their survival. Keep studying them, he told the young archaeologist. If the elders left these things for us to find, there must be a reason. What none of them knew was that similar ruins were activating throughout human territory. On mining worlds and farming colonies, in asteroid belt stations and orbital platforms, the ancient network was awakening after millions of years of sleep. Each site pulsed with the same blue energy, the same urgent patterns, the same message waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, IT continued its advance through the galaxy. But something was different now. The creature's attention had turned toward the human regions of space, drawn by the growing activity of the Elder Network. For the first time since its awakening, IT encountered resistance it could not easily overcome. Human ships, with their simple systems and mechanical controls, proved difficult to corrupt. Human colonies, with their basic technology and independent operations, resisted IT's influence. Human minds, lacking the psychic abilities that made other species vulnerable, remained largely their own. T's hunger grew. These primitive beings should have been easy prey, barely worth the effort to consume. Instead, they were proving to be the most challenging meal the creature had encountered in eons. Their very simplicity made them complex to defeat. The youngest children of the void were beginning to show their true nature, and across the galaxy, in the remnants of great civilizations and the growing human refugee camps, a new understanding was dawning. The battle for galactic survival would not be won by the strongest or the most advanced. It would be won by those who had learned to find strength in their limitations, power in their simplicity, and hope in the face of impossible odds. The real war was about to begin. The resistance began with a simple idea from a human mechanic. Young Su stood in the cargo bay of the Golden Hope, surrounded by salvaged parts from destroyed celestial ships. The alien refugees watched him work with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. They had given up hope of fighting IT with their advanced technology. Now they waited to see what the primitive humans might accomplish with metal and wires. The problem is not that your weapons are weak, Young Su explained to the assembled crowd, his hands busy connecting a celestial energy cell to a simple human chemical explosive. The problem is that your weapons are too smart. They think too much. That thing out there eats thoughts. He held up his creation, a crude device that looked like a metal box with wires sticking out of it. To the celestial engineers present, it was an embarrassment to the concept of technology. But Young Su smiled as he showed them the simple mechanical trigger. This bomb has no computer, no quantum circuits, no psychic interfaces. It is just chemicals that explode when you flip this switch. That thing cannot corrupt what does not think. The idea spread through the refugee camps like wildfire. Humans began stripping the advanced components from salvaged alien technology, keeping only the basic power sources and raw materials. They built weapons that would have been considered primitive 1,000 years ago, but which IT could not easily detect or control. Chemical rockets carried nuclear warheads guided by simple gyroscopes. Kinetic weapons fired metal slugs using magnetic coils controlled by mechanical switches. Communication systems used radio waves instead of quantum entanglement, transmitted through equipment so basic that most aliens had forgotten such technology ever existed. Sora found herself leading a fleet of converted cargo ships, each one modified with the new hybrid weapons. Her engineering skills, once considered barely adequate by galactic standards, now made her one of the most valuable people in human space. She understood how to make complex alien technology work with simple human systems. Remember, she told her crew over the ship's intercom system, we are not trying to match that thing's power. We are trying to survive long enough to hurt it. Our ships are slow and ugly, but they work when theirs do not. The first test came when IT's scouts reached the outer human colonies. These were not the full force of the creature's power, but tendrils of darkness that moved ahead of the main body, testing defenses and gathering information about potential prey. The human defenders watched on primitive radar screens as the dark shapes approached their worlds. Unlike the massive fleets that had tried to stop IT before, the human response was small and simple. A few dozen ships armed with weapons that looked like toys compared to celestial war machines. But when the battle began, something unexpected happened. The human ships could move freely through areas where IT's influence was strongest. Their simple fusion drives and mechanical controls continued to function when more advanced propulsion systems failed. Their weapons struck targets that energy beams and quantum torpedoes could not touch. Most importantly, the humans could think clearly while fighting. Its psychic attacks, which had driven celestial warriors insane with terror and despair, barely affected the human crews. Their minds were too simple and too stubborn to be easily corrupted. Dongwu coordinated the defense from New Seoul Station, using communication methods that would have been ancient when the Celestials were young. Messages traveled by radio waves to relay stations staffed by human operators. Battle plans were written on paper and carried by hand from ship to ship. Tactical decisions were made by human commanders looking at mechanical displays and trusting their instincts. "We cannot match its power," he told his staff during a planning meeting. "But we can be something it does not expect. We can be too simple to corrupt and too stubborn to give up." The victory was small but significant. Its scouts were forced to retreat, something that had not happened since the creature's awakening. The news spread through the refugee camps, bringing hope to beings who had thought their civilizations were doomed. But the real breakthrough came from Taimin on Kepler 442b. The young archaeologist had spent weeks studying the activated Elder ruins, trying to understand their purpose. The symbols had grown brighter each day, creating complex patterns that seemed to pulse with urgent energy. But it was not until he brought in some of the alien refugees that the meaning became clear. "These are not just ruins," explained Dr. Kethvar, a celestial scientist who had once studied ancient technologies. "They are components of a vast network. The Elders built a galaxy-spanning system, but it requires specific neural patterns to activate fully." Taman stared at the glowing symbols, feeling a strange resonance in his mind when he looked at certain patterns. Neural patterns? Like brainwaves? More than that. The Elders designed this system to respond to a particular type of consciousness, one that thinks in specific ways, processes information through certain patterns. Dr. Kethvar paused, studying the readings from his portable scanner. "The activation sequence requires human thought patterns. It was built for your species. The revelation changed everything. The Elder Network was not just a collection of ancient ruins. It was a weapon system, designed specifically to be operated by human minds. Across human space, similar sites were awakening, creating a defensive grid that had waited millions of years for the right operators. But understanding the network and using it were different things. The system was vast and complex, requiring multiple human operators working in perfect coordination. More challenging still, it demanded a level of sacrifice that few species would willingly accept. Yunsu was the first human to successfully link with the Elder technology. She was only 19 years old, a student of ancient languages who had volunteered to help translate the symbols in the ruins. When she placed her hands on the glowing control surfaces, the network responded immediately. The connection was overwhelming. Yunsu could feel the presence of every other Elder site across the galaxy, could sense the patterns of energy that connected them all, but she could also feel what the system required from her. To operate the network fully, she would need to give up her individual consciousness, becoming part of a larger intelligence that spanned multiple worlds. "I can feel it," she told Taman, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "The network is alive. It is waiting for us to join with it. But once we do, we will not be the same. We will be something new." Similar discoveries were happening throughout human space. The Elder ruins were revealing themselves as components of the most powerful defensive system ever built. But using it would require humanity to make a choice that would change their species forever. Meanwhile, IT continued its advance toward the core human worlds. The creature had learned from its encounters with human resistance. It was adapting, finding new ways to attack minds and machines that seemed immune to its previous methods. The final confrontation was approaching. Humanity had discovered the tools they needed to fight back, but using those tools would cost them everything they had been. They would need to choose between remaining human or becoming something greater and stranger. The youngest children of the void stood at the threshold of their destiny. Behind them lay the ruins of galactic civilization. Ahead of them waited a battle that would determine the fate of all life in the universe. The choice was theirs to make. And time was running out. IT came to Earth like a storm made of darkness and hunger. Admiral Wu Jin stood on the bridge of the battleship New Terra, watching the enemy approach through the outer solar system. He had served in the human fleet for 30 years, commanding ships that other species considered barely spaceworthy. Now he found himself leading the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it still looked pitifully small compared to the cosmic horror bearing down on them. "Contact report," called his communications officer, a young woman whose hands shook as she read from her simple paper printouts. "Long-range radar shows the entity has consumed Jupiter Station. All contact lost with the outer planet colonies." Wu Jin nodded grimly. IT had been moving through the solar system for 3 days, feeding on the space stations and mining colonies that humanity had built over the centuries. Each world it consumed made it larger and stronger. Soon it would reach Earth itself, where over 12 billion humans and alien refugees waited for the final battle. The defense fleet numbered less than 2,000 ships. Most were converted cargo haulers and mining vessels, armed with the crude hybrid weapons that Young Su had helped design. They carried chemical rockets and kinetic projectiles, guided by mechanical computers and operated by crews who had trained for months to fight an enemy beyond their understanding. Behind them, protecting Earth and Mars, waited the largest concentration of elder ruins in known space. Taemin and Yunsu had discovered that the Sol system was the center of the ancient network, the control hub for a defensive system that spanned the entire galaxy. But activating that system would require a sacrifice that no one fully understood. "Signal from the surface," the communications officer reported. "Dr. Taemin says the Elder Network is ready for activation. He is requesting final authorization from Fleet Command." Wu Jin looked out at the approaching darkness and made the hardest decision of his life. "Tell him to begin the activation sequence. All ships prepare for engagement. We hold the line here no matter what." On Earth's surface, in a chamber deep beneath the Elder Ruins near Sol, Taemin placed his hands on the glowing control surfaces for what he knew would be the last time. Around him, 19 other human volunteers prepared to do the same. They had spent weeks learning to synchronize their thoughts, to merge their individual consciousness into something larger. Yunsu was among them, her young face calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "Are you ready?" she asked the others. They nodded silently. Each of them understood what activation would cost. To operate the Elder Network at full power, they would need to surrender their individual minds, becoming nodes in a vast intelligence that stretched across space and time. They would save the galaxy, but they would no longer be human in any meaningful sense. "For Earth," Taemin said quietly, "for all the worlds that still have hope." They activated the network together. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Light erupted from Elder Ruins across human space, creating a web of energy that connected hundreds of worlds. The ancient defensive system, built by beings who had transcended physical existence eons ago, came online for the first time in millions of years. But IT felt the activation too. The creature's attention turned toward Earth with the focused intensity of a predator that has finally found worthy prey. Its advance accelerated, drawing power from the consumed worlds to fuel its approach to the solar system's heart. The space battle that followed would be remembered as long as any intelligent species survived. To tell the story, human ships engaged IT's manifestations throughout the asteroid belt, using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. They rammed their vessels into the creature's dark tendrils, detonating nuclear charges at point-blank range. They fired streams of metal projectiles that tore through IT's substance like bullets through flesh. So-Ra led a squadron of converted mining ships in a desperate attack on IT's main body. Her vessel, the Honest Work, was a clumsy cargo hauler that had never been designed for combat. But its simple systems continued to function in areas where more advanced ships would have failed completely. "All ships, target the center mass," she called over the radio. "Hit it with everything we have. Make every shot count." The human weapons were primitive by galactic standards, but they worked in ways that IT could not easily counter. Chemical explosives detonated regardless of the creature's psychic influence. Kinetic projectiles followed the laws of physics rather than responding to electronic commands. Nuclear reactions proceeded according to atomic forces that IT could not corrupt. But for every small victory, the humans paid a terrible price. Ships were consumed by IT's expanding darkness. Crews were absorbed into the creature's alien consciousness. Entire squadrons vanished in moments, their sacrifice buying only seconds of time for their comrades. Young Su died when his experimental bomber struck its core, detonating a fusion warhead that briefly illuminated half the solar system. His final words, transmitted over the radio, were simple and defiant. "That is for everyone you ate, you monster." The battle raged for hours as IT pressed toward Earth. The human fleet fought with desperate courage, but they were clearly losing. For every wound they inflicted on the creature, IT healed itself by consuming more of their ships and crews. Then the Elder Network reached full activation. 20 human minds, led by Tai Min and Yunsu, merged into a single intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions. They were no longer individual people but part of something vast and ancient, connected to powers that the Elders had left behind for this exact moment. The network was not just a weapon, it was a trap. The Elders had foreseen IT's return and had prepared a prison that could contain the creature forever. But the prison required a conscious species to willingly sacrifice their advancement, accepting permanent limitations on their technological development in exchange for keeping IT trapped. The merged human consciousness understood the choice immediately. They could save the galaxy, but only by ensuring that humanity would never again develop the kind of advanced technology that had attracted IT in the first place. They would remain forever at their current level, using simple machines and basic tools, cut off from the heights of achievement that other species had reached. It was the ultimate sacrifice. Not just their lives, but their future. Not just their individual existence, but their species' potential for greatness. Through the network, they felt the desperate battle raging in space above them. They sensed Sora's ship taking critical damage, Admiral Wu Jin's flagship under attack by IT's tendrils, thousands of human crews fighting against impossible odds. The choice was clear. Do it. Yunsu's consciousness whispered across the network. Save them all. The trap activated with the force of a collapsing star. Reality twisted around IT as dimensional barriers snapped into place, creating a prison from which nothing could escape. The creature fought against the containment, but the Elder technology was too powerful and too well designed. IT was pulled into a pocket dimension, separated from normal space-time by barriers that would hold for eternity. The darkness that had consumed entire civilizations vanished in an instant, leaving only empty space where the cosmic horror had been. But the victory came at the promised cost. The Elder Network burned out most of Earth's technological infrastructure, reducing humanity's capabilities to pre-spaceflight levels. Faster-than-light communication failed. Quantum computers shut down permanently. Energy weapons became useless chunks of metal. The 20 humans who had operated the network were gone, their consciousness absorbed into the ancient system that now maintained IT's prison. They existed still in a sense, but they were no longer individuals. They had become eternal guardians watching over the trap that held the galaxy's greatest threat. In space above Earth, the surviving human ships found themselves adrift. Their simple mechanical system still functioned, but all the salvaged alien technology had been rendered inert by the network's activation. Sora's ship limped back toward Earth using chemical thrusters, its crew alive but forever changed by what they had witnessed. The war was over. IT was contained. The galaxy was safe, but humanity had paid for that safety with their future among the stars. 10 years after the Battle of Seoul, Dongwu walked through the rebuilt streets of New Seoul City with slow, careful steps. His hair had gone completely gray during the reconstruction, and his back ached from years of manual labor. But his eyes still held the determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hour. The city around him was different from what it had been before IT's arrival. The floating platforms and energy bridges were gone, replaced by simple concrete and steel structures. Transportation moved on wheels and tracks rather than gravity manipulators. People carried information on paper rather than storing it in quantum computers. To visitors from other worlds, it looked like humanity had taken a massive step backward. But Dongwu knew better. This was not regression. This was adaptation. The Federation Council is requesting another meeting, his assistant Jisoo told him as they walked toward the spaceport. She was young, born after the war, and had never known a world where humans traveled between stars with ease. To her, the current way of life was normal. Dongwu nodded. The new Galactic Federation was very different from the old Celestial Empire. Representatives from dozens of species met regularly on neutral worlds to coordinate trade, settle disputes, and share knowledge. But they always requested human mediators for the most difficult negotiations. "What is the issue this time?" he asked. "The Zarathians want to rebuild their quantum communication network. The Kelvin Republic is concerned that advanced technology might attract unwanted attention. They want human arbitrators to help them find a compromise. It was the same pattern that had emerged across the galaxy in the years since IT's defeat. The surviving alien species were slowly rebuilding their civilizations, but they were terrified of returning to the level of advancement that had made them vulnerable in the first place. They looked to humanity for guidance, trusting the species that had sacrificed everything to save them all. At the spaceport, Sora was waiting beside her ship. The Honest work had been rebuilt 3 times over the past decade, each reconstruction using simpler and more reliable components. It could no longer travel faster than light, but it could carry passengers and cargo between the inner worlds of human space with absolute dependability. Ready for another diplomatic mission? Sora asked with a tired smile. Like all the war veterans, she carried the weight of memory in her eyes. She had seen friends die in the darkness, had watched civilizations fall, had helped rebuild a galaxy from the ruins of the old. As ready as anyone can be, Dongwu replied. How long to reach the Centauri station? 6 months each way. The fusion drive is running smoothly, and the navigation computer is as reliable as mechanical clockwork can make it. Sora patted the hull of her ship affectionately. She is not fast, but she will get us there. The journey gave Dongwu time to think about the changes that had swept across human space. In the outer colonies, life had settled into new patterns. People worked with their hands more than their minds, built things to last rather than to impress, and found satisfaction in simple accomplishments rather than technological marvels. Some called it a golden age. Others mourned it as humanity's greatest tragedy. Dongwu thought it was probably both. On Kepler 442b, the elder ruins still glowed with soft blue light. The site had become a memorial to the 20 humans who had sacrificed their individual existence to save the galaxy. Pilgrims from dozens of species came to pay their respects to Taemin, Yunsu, and the others who had become eternal guardians. Young Sik was the current caretaker of the memorial. He was Taemin's nephew, a quiet man who had inherited his uncle's love of ancient history and archaeological mysteries. He tended the ruins with simple tools and honest work, maintaining the site where humanity had claimed its destiny. Sometimes I can hear them, he told visitors who asked about the merged consciousness that maintained IT's prison. Not words exactly, more like whispers in the back of my mind. They are still there, still watching, still protecting us all. The ruins themselves had changed over the years. The complex technological systems had simplified, becoming something more like living crystal than advanced machinery. They pulsed with the rhythm of sleeping hearts, a gentle reminder that somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, an ancient horror remained safely contained. Scientists from across the galaxy studied the site, trying to understand how the Elder Network functioned, but they could only scratch the surface of its mysteries. The technology operated on principles that transcended normal physics, powered by forces that could only be controlled by merged human consciousness. It was humanity's gift to the galaxy, and their burden to bear forever. The Centauri station served as the new capital of the Galactic Federation. Unlike the floating cities of the old Celestial Empire, it was built with practical materials and straightforward engineering. The meeting halls were simple but comfortable. The communication systems used reliable radio transmissions rather than quantum entanglement. The entire structure could be maintained by crews with basic technical training. Dongwu spent 3 weeks mediating between the Zorathian and Kelvin delegations. The issue was complex, involving questions of technological development, security concerns, and the balance between progress and safety. Both sides had valid points, but they could not find common ground without neutral arbitration. The solution, when it came, was typically human in its simplicity. Build your quantum network, Dongwu told the Zorathians, but keep it isolated from other systems. Use human-designed circuit breakers that will shut down the entire network if anything unusual happens, and staff the control centers with operators who can work without computer assistance if necessary. It was not the elegant technological solution that either species would have preferred, but it was practical, reliable, and safe. Most importantly, it included safeguards that could be operated by simple human technology, ensuring that another cosmic horror could never again use advanced systems against their creators. The agreement was signed using pens and paper, documents that would be stored in physical archives rather than digital databases. It was a small symbol of how the galaxy had changed, but an important one. On the journey home, Sora asked the question that many humans struggled with. Do you ever wonder what we might have accomplished if we had not made that choice? Where humanity might have gone if we had kept developing our technology? Dongwu considered the question while watching the stars through the ship's simple optical viewports. I think about it sometimes. We might have built cities among the stars, traveled to other galaxies, unlocked the secrets of the universe itself. But we also might have awakened something worse than IT. We might have destroyed ourselves with our own power. We might have become so advanced that we lost touch with what made us human in the first place. Sora nodded thoughtfully. The other species still see us as primitive. They are grateful for what we did, but they pity us for what we gave up. Let them pity us, Dongwu said with a slight smile. We know something they do not understand. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from accepting limitations. Sometimes the wisest choice is to remain simple. Back on Earth, children who had been born after the war were beginning to come of age. They would never know the feeling of traveling faster than light, or the convenience of quantum computers. Their tools would be mechanical, their transportation chemical, their communication limited by the speed of radio waves. But they would also inherit a galaxy at peace, protected by their parents' sacrifice and guided by human wisdom. They would be the keepers of a simple but profound truth, that heroism was not about having the greatest power, but about using whatever power you had to protect others. The memorial on Kepler 442b grew brighter as the years passed, fed by the gratitude of countless species who owed their existence to human sacrifice. In that light, visitors could sometimes glimpse shadows of the 20 guardians who watched over IT's prison, eternal protectors who had given up their humanity to save all life in the universe. And in the simple colonies of human space, people went about their daily lives with quiet satisfaction. They built things with their hands, solved problems with their minds, and raised their children to value courage over power, wisdom over cleverness, and sacrifice over self-interest. They were the youngest children of the void, and they had proven that sometimes the smallest voices could speak the loudest truths. In a galaxy filled with wonders and terrors, they had chosen to remain human. It was enough.